I will start kicking it off, but welcome everybody from all over. This is such a joy to be here with you today, this morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Happy to be here. I'm Shannon McLay, the founder and CEO of the Financial Gym. Um, I started the Financial Gym, or had the idea for the Financial Gym 8 years ago when I was working as a financial advisor at Merrill Lynch. To work with me at Merrill Lynch, you had to have 250,000 in assets, and I didn't think there was anything about that was a big deal until I started working with people and realized the majority of Americans don't have 250,000 in assets, but want and need help with their money and want to pay somebody. So I left Merrill to start building it. And at the time I thought, when we want to get physically healthy, we have so many places to go to get physically healthy. But if people want to get financially healthy, where would they go? And I thought you would go to a financial gym. So I started to building this. We now work with clients all over the US. We work in every state. And we have 4 physical gym locations, 2 in New York, 1 in DC, and 1 in LA. So excited to be here today. Another really important detail I think that everybody should know is that I am a divorced co-parent. So I'm not only speaking as a professional that does this for a living and helps couples and families manage finances for a living, but also have to do it myself in the co-parenting state. So a 15-year-old son, and so I'm in the boat with all these for everybody. We're going to get going into this. Now I have some prepared comments. We got some things in advance, some action items we were asked to address, and we want to address that. And then I really want to leave a bunch of time for as much questions as possible, because there's always money questions. And I want everyone to feel like this is a very safe space, because wherever I am and money is, it is an absolute safe space. And I know there's people in different stages. I know some people may not be married, but they're co-parenting. I know some people maybe in like the pre-divorce stage, post-divorce stage. So I'm going to address a few different stages to try to get the most amount of information for the group. And then again, happy to answer as many questions as possible as we get going. So we're going to talk about some pre-divorce financial information we need to think about if you're in that stage, post-divorce financial planning, how we move on financially as we're moving forward past the experience of divorce, and then including your kids. This is a very important thing. We're all parents here, and I always say financial literacy is like regular literacy. It has to start in the home, and preferably at an early age. So we'll talk more about that, and then some action items and takeaways that we can have from today, so that it's time well spent for everybody. So let's get going on pre-divorce finances. So there are a few things that, when we're helping couples and they're thinking about looking at getting divorced or splitting their finances, moving apart, there's a number of things that we just want people to go through and know, especially if you're going through the divorce process, especially if you're trying to negotiate settle alimony or child support, or figure it out. One of the biggest issues we see that happens is frequently, because again, the divorce, if whoever's been through a divorce or in the process of it, it is one of the most emotional times of your life, of your family's life. The ending of a relationship is challenging, emotional, painful. Whenever there's emotions and money, we're not always thinking our most clear. And so what we have seen unfortunately happen a lot is that sometimes divorce settlements, just maybe we're in a rush, or we're tired of fighting, or whatever it is, and you might go into a settlement and it's not going to work out for you financially, and really when you are in the process of doing the settlement, you really want to make sure everything makes sense financially for you and your home, and that and your children's home, and so you really want to have a good idea of what your monthly expenses look like, what you're going to be able to sustain in your post-divorce life. If you're splitting and going to live somewhere else, what is it going to look like? What is the income going to look like? So what do your monthly expenses look like? And one of the biggest challenges we see at the gym is people don't really know what their monthly expenses look like. And especially if you're currently with your significant other and you're managing monthly expenses together, it's hard to know which ones you're going to have on your own. So really taking a deep dive and looking, how much your housing is going to cost. Taking the last 3 months of your credit card bills or your bank account statements, looking at what those variable expenses are. And we like you to take 3 months and look at what those average payments are. And are you going to have to handle them yourself? What is that number going to look like? That is really one of the most important exercises you need to go through before you are separating finances and figuring things out, especially when lawyers are involved. You really want to know what you're going to be able to manage. Another big consideration that we see frequently is if there's a home involved. A lot of times there's an emotional connection to the home, and one parent might feel like it's very important to stay in the home with the children, but they haven't run this monthly expenses exercise, realizing that maybe the home is not going to be an option for you post, split, post the divorce. And I'm guilty of this. When I got divorced, I was staying with my son. I wanted to stay in the home that he was in. We were already, splitting so much of his life was going to change. I didn't want the home that he was living in to change. And what happened was I got 2 years into that, I was living paycheck to paycheck. I was having a tough time paying for the bills of the home, to keep him there. And I had the realization that I needed to sell the home, to downsize. And I had a moment where it was in January, it was 3 years ago. And I cried myself to sleep that night because I was like, I'm going to have to I told my ex-husband, I said, we're going to have to tell Will, like we're moving and we have to sell the house. And I cried myself to sleep that night because I was so concerned about what I was going to do to my child. And the next morning I woke up, I said, we're going to have a family meeting, told my son, and he said, am I in trouble? I said, you're not in trouble. I said, but we got daddy's coming. We're going to talk about some things. And he said, was this why you were crying last night? And I was like, oh, you heard that? And he's like, yeah, you kind of cry really loud. And I was like, yes, it was why I was crying. Do you want to know? He's like, no, I'll wait to the meeting. As long as I'm not in trouble, I don't care. And, and we moved, and, it was challenging in that time, but I'm living where I'm living now. It's significantly less. He felt better. My son knew I was stressed. Like, your kids know when you're stressed, and they really do want you to be happy. So really understanding what that's going to look like, and understanding, not putting the emotion of it in it, but like the math of it is really important. Managing legal expenses is a huge part of this process. And, I think most of us know if we've been through it. And I think somebody posted in chat, the lawyers are the ones who make out the most here. And, again, I know it gets really emotional, but if you can find ways to manage that, I'm going to talk about in a second too, is going to be really important, because you don't want to have that. After, I'm going to have a slide just on the expenses. And then a consideration somebody asked is, what if your future ex-spouse has better credit? Maybe you have a mortgage, or you've gotten loans or things like that, and your ex has better credit. This is something to think about. What is your credit going to look like on its own? And we're going to talk a little bit about how we can repair that, but it will be something to consider. You'll have to consider how you do your financing and what your options are, because if your ex was carrying better credit, it doesn't mean you don't have options for buying another home or getting another apartment on your own or things like that. But we'll talk about how we can fix that as well. So some things to think about pre-divorce. The biggest thing, like I just said, was managing legal fees. I mean, of all the divorce finance costs, or split up costs, the legal fees can get astronomical. And the biggest thing I tell clients is attorneys are willing to work with you. You can go on payment plans with them. You're able to have that option. The great thing is whenever you go on a payment plan with your attorney, it's usually an interest-free loan, because they're not like a personal loan. Like, we've seen people take out personal loans or put things on credit cards. And the problem is, when you do that, then you have interest payments and high interest payments you have to have, versus trying to go on a payment plan with your attorney, because they'll just put you on this billing system, and it's essentially an interest-free loan. thinking about, can you share the attorney with your ex is something to think about, where they have, the one attorney that's doing all the legal work, the legal representation, and then you would represent yourself pro se, which means you're representing yourself. Having a friend or somebody to kind of look over the documents, but you can in many states represent yourself, and that would save money, and then you could split the attorney fee. The biggest thing, and the third thing is, is there a mediator in your life? Is it the two of you? You don't necessarily have to pay a mediator, but how can you get to the same page together quickly, and preferably with no lawyer involved, is going to be the most financially optimal condition for you. And I think what's something that's really important to know, and it can get, again, very emotional with the legal fees back and forth, is that, this is the ending of one relationship. It's the beginning of a new journey for you and your family afterward. And you really want to make sure that that new journey looks as optimistic and as, financially healthy as possible. And so, not putting that much, cost and energy into this process is great. Most divorce agreements are just templates, essentially. So the biggest part is just hashing out some of the details between you and your ex. For me and my ex personally, it was margaritas and a restaurant where we both enjoyed going, and we just literally kind of hashed things out between the two of us. With our who was getting him on Thanksgiving and things like that. We were able to do it ourselves and send it to the attorney, and then they just drafted the document. So trying to have as much conversation between the two of you and keeping it as the best you can in a very challenging situation is going to save you a lot of money. And that's more money for your future, which is the most important part. The next thing is thinking about your post-budget divorce. So again, having a good idea of what it's going to look like going in, so that you're making sure whenever you do have these settlements and you know what the child support's going to be, or alimony, if you're going to have that, if it's all going to work out for you. The next thing is, you're separated, you have your own finances. The big thing you want to do is, and if you haven't yet, and you haven't gone through this exercise, is we say, step on the financial scale first. What is all the details? What does it look like for you? Do you have credit card debt? Do you have personal loans, student loans? What is credit cards, whatever you have out there. And really know what the financial details are of your life at that point that you're going to be responsible for. What is the income you have coming in, whether it's your own employment income, unemployment income, or alimony or child support. What does that look like? And then what are the monthly expenses you're paying for too? This is something that is can get very challenging. You might have some shared expenses that are agreed upon in your divorce settlement, but things always come up, and you want to know that what you're going to be responsible for. Are you going to be responsible for the camps, or the extra things, the sneakers, the clothing, these little things that add up? It's again, it's best to kind of hash that out so you understand what's going to be your responsibility. And then, does your divorce settlement make sense for given all of this? It's very emotional to look at money, and we're going to go into that a little bit more, how we're going to deal with the emotional side of it. But we see frequently people just don't understand where all the numbers are and what it looks like for them. So, and the other thing is, people don't love the word budget. That's another thing I just want to say. I know I put this title of this slide, budget. Post-divorce, I always say budgets are like diets. No one wants to be on one. So if you don't like the word budget, you're not alone. But what the budget's going to do, and figuring out what the expenses are going out, what's coming in and what's left, that what's left number is your kind of spending budget. And I just think of a budget as being like a fence. It's giving you this parameter of where you can safely spend money, and you won't get into trouble. So just like a fence keeps you protected from going out in the street and getting hit by a car, your budget's going to protect you from going out in the street and getting hit by credit card debt. or some other, financial trouble. So, don't think about it as being limited. Think about it as being your safe spending space, and figuring out what that is going to be really important, in the post-divorce scenario. For some people, in the post-divorce scenario, of course, post-breakup scenario, building and rebuilding credit is going to be important. So I mentioned before, if your ex had the better credit score, then you're going to have to think about what are your options if you're going to, want to buy a home, or need to refinance a car, or refinance your student loans, things where maybe your ex was a part of that process. You want to make sure you are that you know your credit score is, because it'll be on you now going forward. So the first thing is knowing what your credit score is. If you don't know, for most credit card companies on the app, they will tell you what the FICO score is, or you can go to Credit Karma, sites like Credit Karma or Credit Sesame will give you your score for free. They'll also give you your report card, so you'll kind of know what work you might need to do to rebuild or repair if you need to do it. What I always tell people, with credit, it's not a big deal if you don't have the best credit. I will say this probably, if I say it once, I'll say it 18,000 times in the next 45 minutes, but it's really important to note that everything you do financially is fixable. Every single thing you do financially is fixable. Whether you file for bankruptcy, whether you don't have enough saved, whether you have a poor credit score, this is your money situation is not life or death. Like your family situation is life or death. Money is not. So even if you have bad credit, everything is fixable. So maybe you want to think about, getting a secured credit card is a great first step. If you need to build or rebuild your credit. And I'm happy to answer more questions around credit, but it typically takes about 2 to 5 years to kind of rebuild your credit. If you had a bankruptcy or something like that out there, it'll take 7+ years. But we've seen clients go from bankruptcy to buying homes, and it's just a matter of time. But if you need to do that, we'll start the work and then make sure you're going toward that, and you'll adjust your timing and what you want to do based on how much work you need to be doing on your credit. But you will be able to get there on your own if you're not there yet. Another thought to think about in the post-divorce financial planning space, what does it look like for you? If you're not there yet, and maybe you are, you're separated, or you're already there, you're already post-divorce, and you're feeling like your finances don't feel as strong as they were when you're with somebody, which that typically happens, although we have some people who their finances get better without the other person there. But if you're feeling strapped and struggling, paying for things and living this life on your own without your significant other, you really want to think about lifestyle and what does it look like. The reality is if you don't have 2 incomes, or you don't have another person there, things are going to have to change. And like I said earlier, sometimes it's really hard because we're concerned about our children, we're concerned about the changes we've already made in their lives, and so we don't want to disrupt the cart too much. But you're going to have to change. It's going to have to change. We're going to talk more about how we deal with the kids, but things are going to have to change, but they don't have to change for the worse. The biggest thing that I say to clients when they're thinking about spending and how they're spending their money is to think about, what are the 1 or 2 areas of where and how you spend your money, and are your non-negotiables. What are those 2 areas that you need to survive and thrive in your life? And that's, what are those? And it should be 1 or 2. It shouldn't be a whole cast of characters. And when you focus on those 1 or 2 things, which could be travel, they could be health and wellness, they could be, fur babies or whatever for the family expenses. What are those things? And then really prioritize that you're able to afford and spend on those. And then everything else has to be negotiable. The other thing that we've seen frequently with divorced parents is that one is having typically has too much of the expenses, and they don't want to get into a fight or have to deal with the ex to adjust it. But you don't necessarily have to go back to court to manage it, but you should be monitoring and hopefully have conversations, whether it's you're just sending, your ex all the money you spent that month on the kids, and they send you the same thing. Really, just making sure it seems balanced. If it's not, because sometimes we see people get into financial problems because they just want to avoid having, dealing with the ex. But I think the best financial advice I give to everybody in this scenario, in the divorce, separated, co-parenting space, the best financially healthy option you can have is trying to get to a very amicable relationship with your ex. And I've been there. It's not always the easiest thing, but if you can get to that place, then the money decisions are actually easier. The first year after my divorce, it was very challenging between us emotionally, but we both worked at that. And I'll tell you, the finances really do get better when the relationship gets better. So that's something to think about. As I know, again, this is really hard to get, emotionally back, or amicable in some relationships, but it will help you financially. So I highly encourage that as well. Are you going to discuss financial wellness for those who don't have amicable relationships? Yeah. So if you are in a situation where it is not amicable and it's difficult to get on the same page, the reality is it's just going to be more financial work for you, because you really do have to then budget for and expect that you're going to be paying for more. And that's what's really important, of like looking at the finance, understanding what you're paying and what they look like. Because if that is going to be it, then what we look at, especially for people, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but then maybe we need to find a way to make more money. How do we negotiate our income, look at other side hustles, get children to work out? We have to work on, how we get more money in, because it's just an unfortunate reality that, it's just more on your plate. But if we can't get to that place, then you just have to budget for more. And when you have to pay more, then we need to make more. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But, then the other thing is, what is your, what do you want your future to look like? I think this is also really important, because a lot of times what happens after, the breakup, the split up, the post-divorce life is that so much of like maybe your future financial decisions were tied up in that other relationship and kind of continue on the future one. And it's really important. Now you have the opportunity to reset that. If you didn't love owning a home, you don't have to own a home. I mean, a lot of people out there say, oh, you have to own a home, you shouldn't rent. If you are building wealth somewhere other than a home, that is equally as good. You don't have to own a home. You can be nimble in where you go. If you're going to have to pay for retire, if you're going to be retired on your own, there's so many inexpensive places you can go for retirement. You don't necessarily have to, it doesn't have to look where you are. I think it's really important to understand that wherever you are currently in your financial situation, your picture doesn't have to stay there. And you can make different choices along the way, especially to ease some stress in your life. So I want to address some money emotions, but I think we've been getting some questions coming in, Patrick. So are we doing questions throughout, or should we hold questions to the end? I want to make sure that before we go into the emotional stuff, we address some of maybe okay, questions. We'll wait till questions at the end. So that's some of the logistical money, financial stuff. The biggest thing that I talk to people about with money is understanding that money is very emotional. So everybody here is either in a split co-parenting situation, and that is emotional. It is emotional every day to manage your children, your ex, yourself personally. That's highly emotional. And then money is going to be another emotional situation for you as well. And so I think we don't realize how much of it comes into play. And so the few things that I give you, a few tips to help kind of manage the money emotions. First of all, 90+% of people feel financial anxiety. So if you're somebody feeling it, and your financial situation, your family's financial situation feels challenging, you're not alone. Even people in really good financial health feel financial anxiety. So, and then the other two emotions we hear all the time are fear and shame around finances. Afraid I'm not going to be able to pay my bills or retire. I'm ashamed I have credit card debt. And so the first step of kind of dealing with the fear and shame part of it is accepting the past, right? We have people come into the gym all the time and say, I know I should be good with money. I'm really intelligent. I don't know money. And let me tell you what, there is no reason why any of us should be good with money, because financial literacy, like I said, is a language like regular literacy. Financial literacy is a language. And yet most of us didn't learn it at home growing up. We didn't learn about it at school, and we didn't learn about it at the job. And yet we're expected to do well with our finances. And the analogy I give, it's like saying you have to, like, let's just say it's Greek, like you have to learn Greek. And but you weren't given any classes in Greek, you didn't speak Greek at home, and then you start making money, or you're managing your money, whether it's child support, alimony, whatever, you have money, and now you're expected to live in Greece, and you don't know Greek. How are you supposed to feel confident in that? So that's something to accept. So there's probably no way for it, but there are ways to get financially literate. And that's the next step, is accepting the past. Like, even if you weren't good, there's no reason why you should, but let it go, because everything we do financially is fixable. And really getting financially literate and understanding what some of your choices are will actually give you more confidence, take away the fear and shame, and make you feel more comfortable with it. There's so many different resources. I personally love podcasts because they're free. And, it's just like, again, think about learning a language. Some people will buy a book and say, oh, it didn't work for me. It's because it's hard sometimes to read financial stuff as a jargony thing. Although a really good book that's not jargony is Your Money or Your Life. That's a really good way of kind of framing money without kind of getting too much into the jargony stuff. But so I suggest podcasts because they're free and you can hear it, just like learning another language. You can hear it. There's also great YouTube videos and resources to get things. Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, CFPB.gov, I believe, is a really great resource the US government's created to kind of help you understand some different things. They have a lot of great educational resources to get financially literate. And let me see, there's some questions coming in. Or was there a question? Patrick, I can't say. No. Okay, we're waiting to answer. Okay. And then the next thing is making the plan. A lot of us, if we're feeling anxiety or fear and shame around our finances, it's really tough. You actually want to avoid the thing that's creating the finances. So most of us maybe don't want to get in our money and look at the scenario. But when you actually have a plan and you set the goals and you know what the goals are that you want to look at, it actually takes away the stress. Like when you understand, the budget, what's coming in, the plan you're going to make, it actually is a lot less stressful for you, even though it seems stressful to do it at the time. I think somebody just asked about the government website. It's CFPB, so Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, and I think it's CFPB.gov. But if you just Google Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, that's the US's. I think it's one of the best resources for some financial literacy, and it is free. Lots of great free literacy. So money, emotions around money is a big thing that we see impacting people's finances. Again, there's emotions of split and then of money. The other thing that we see is that people don't really have financial exercises to kind of help them with their money. So that's something we hear all the time is, one of the biggest ones is, I don't know where all my money's going. I make it, I don't know where it goes. And so we have a few things, these are kind of some tips and tricks for kind of getting you on a better money mindset practice. The first one is mindfully spending. So like I said, we hear all the time, I don't know where my money's going. And I talked about earlier about knowing where your money is going. And the biggest thing we say as a starting point is just tracking your expenses. Like, do you know what it looks like? We make a lot of fitness analogies or health and wellness analogies at the gym. And it's just like tracking your calories if you're trying to lose weight, or tracking your steps if you're trying to get more active. A way to get financially active is tracking your spending. So do you have a way to know every time you spend your money, whether you swipe a card or, or pay something out or use your app, like, are you tracking it all in one place? So we tell clients to go on that exercise for, 1 or 2 months, and don't do it with judgment, but every time you spend money, whenever you do, write it down, or there's budget tracker apps, and get in the practice of knowing it. When you start tracking it, you actually become more mindful of your spending, you become more thoughtful about it, and you actually end up spending less money. So it's a really great exercise to become more mindful about how your spending's going. The other thing is, on the money mindset and healthy money mindset practices is really to stop comparing. I mean, especially in our lives as single co-parents and having children and wanting to give our kids the best, feeling like maybe we're not giving them the best because we are separated, divorced, or single parenting. It can feel like we're not doing that, but stop comparing it. Comparison's the thief of joy. And also, the biggest thing too is money is very taboo, and we're not really talking about it. So, you can't assume that somebody else's life and whatever they're doing is better than yours, because we see a lot of people coming in, maybe they look nice on Instagram and social media, but they're sitting on a bunch of credit card debt and they're stressed out about finances too. So it doesn't necessarily say that. I remember one time my son coming home from school like years ago and talking about the expensive sneakers his friends had. And I was like, well, I'm not responsible for those people's spending. I said, I'm responsible for this household spending money smartly. And that's what we're going to do. And spending $200 on sneakers you're going to outgrow in 4 months is not responsible. So, that's the conversation I had with him. But it is challenging. But, the less we can compare and, control our own households, the better we're going to be. And the last kind of great money mindset, healthy money mindset practice is practicing gratitude. And there are so many challenging days, raising children, managing our finances, managing our relationship with our ex, that it can feel like gratitude is very challenging to do. But, just even writing it down, there's gratitude journals online, but you could just write in a notebook, like every day, like 1 or 2 things that you're grateful for. It really does shift how it's going. And it is very emotional. Again, the situations a lot of us are in, and it's hard to kind of see out of that. But if you just take the time and write 1 or 2 things, especially in the challenging times, it will start to change how you're looking, and it will start to impact your money in a positive way. A lot of times we see people who are in a negative money mindset, like negatively healthy headspace, they spend more because, that's a natural inclination when we're not feeling well. So that gratitude practice is not only going to feel better for you personally, but also help your budget. The last kind of point I really want to bring up is including your kids. Okay, we're all parents here, and I don't know about anybody here. My parents never talked about money growing up, and except I knew that we didn't have a lot of money in my household growing up. I knew my mom had 3 jobs. I knew she was stressed about finances, and I kind of saw what not to do, but we never talked about it. And it's because my mom didn't feel comfortable about it. But practicing and talking with your kids is really important, because they pick up on everything and they actually want to be included in it. So the sooner you start talking about finances with them, the better. You can start as early as 4 and 5. I always say, that from an early age, you want to start giving your kids some economic situations where they can like earn money, or I would say like give your kids the opportunity to earn money, spend money, and save money in some kind of vacuum, whether it's chores or if they get good grades or whatever, or they earn things around the house. Like giving them an economic system from an early age is really important. And cash is the best teacher of money for kids, just as an FYI. I know there's so many debit cards and credit cards and things like that, but the reality is that and for us as adults too, when we use debit and credit cards, every time we swipe a card, our brain processing center actually goes numb, and we're not we're not being mindful of what we just did and we just spent money. It actually numbs our center when we swipe a card. So it's not helping our kids learn, but cash is such a great teacher, because when it's gone, it is gone. And you want your kids to have some of these painful financial lessons too from an early age, especially when they're in the house. It's better for your kid to run out of money, of cash, $20 or whatever, when they're 5, than running out of money, when they're 25. So, starting them, and then as they get older, including them more and more into what's going on with the household and the financial decisions you're making, because they're going to have to make these decisions at some point too. And you don't have to be the perfect financial decision maker to talk about this with your kids. Like some of them are, wanting can actually give you some good insight, can help you with the budgeting decisions. Sometimes we want to give them so much and we can't necessarily, afford. I'm sorry, let me look at the notes. We'll send a follow-up email later. Okay, the presentation. Okay. Trying to look at what's good. There's a lot of stuff going on in the chat and keeping up with what I'm saying. But I included my son, if he wants to, and especially when your kids have, they ask for things and they want things like, oh, I want to go to camp, or I want to do this. It's like, okay, well, let's look at how much that costs. And like, let's look at how much is coming in, and having the family conversation. You should never be embarrassed or ashamed or whatever about situations with their kids. Like most of us have to talk to our kids about sex at some point, right? Like talk about a taboo topic that we don't want to do. Why aren't we talking about money with them? That money's the ultimate taboo topic. And that's the topic we should be talking about with them too. And again, it doesn't matter if you don't feel highly confident with it. They let them kind of be a part of the decision-making process. Let them know the challenges, that there are financial challenges, but here's what we're doing to work it out. And here's how you can help to alleviate that, or let's make decisions collectively as a household unit. And, if you don't feel financially literate as well, then maybe, you can do that alongside with your child. Listen to these podcasts in the car with the kids, watch, YouTube videos with the kids, read the books together with the kids, include them. If you're getting financially literate yourself, like include the kids in the process. They want to be a part of it. And I think so much time we have all the stress on our shoulders, we're managing our money ourselves, especially if we're single parents. And our kids feel the stress. They know what's going on in the household. They are picking up on the vibes. And if money is one of those negative vibes, bringing them into the conversation is really important. So back to that time I had with my son, where I told him we had to sell the house, and we told me we had to sell the house and move. And then his birthday was the month later. And I said, what do you want to do for your birthday? And he said, let's do something cheap. And I was like, oh, okay. And in my mind, I was like, great. I want to do something cheap too. And he's like, I said, what kind of cheap? He's like Chipotle or something like that. And I was like, I mean, even better. It like made my day. And so we had the Chipotle birthday. And that was 3-4 years ago now. He was 9 and he was 11. And super cheap birthday. And then the next year, we had sold the house. We were in a better place financially. And I said, where do you want to go for dinner? He picked a different place. And I said to him, I said, did you pick Chipotle last year because you knew we weren't doing well financially? He's like, yeah. He was like, yeah, it wasn't a big deal. Like I knew because we shared that. And we laugh about the Chipotle birthday still 4 years later. And he was a part of the decision. And so I would say make them part of the decision more than not, because they are part of the household. They are more considerate and helpful than we think, and they can help you get financially healthy too, and be accountability buddies in the home. So some action items to do now, later, whatever. What podcast do I recommend for financial literacy for beginners? I have a podcast called Martinis in Your Money, Living a Better Life One Cocktail at a Time. We go through a lot of different topics. There's also Real Simple has a money podcast. Stacking Benjamins has a really good podcast that I know a lot of people like. And then there's different podcasts for different areas, like whether it's investing or financial independence. But if you just search, personal finance podcasts, there's a lot of great resources out there too. And again, what I love about podcasts is they're free. And again, if you're including the kids, you can listen into the car with them, or, in the house, whatever, you can do it together. So, okay, a few things to do. what is your stepping on the financial scale? If you've never done it, if you haven't done it, if you don't know where all the things are, it's a really great exercise to do. April's Financial Literacy Month. We're actually in Financial Literacy Month now. So it's a exercise we like to see our clients do. If you want to put, you could put it in an Excel spreadsheet, write it down on a piece of paper, use sites like Personal Capital or things like that to pull everything in one place. Think about and create your plans, that things you want to accomplish, the things you want to do, what that's going to look like for you. Know your worth. So, this is an action I would give to everybody. If you're feeling like you're living paycheck to paycheck, if you run those numbers and they don't make sense to you, thinking about income is a really big part of managing a financially healthy lifestyle. And are you getting paid what you're worth? Especially women are certainly, we see challenges with our clients. Is there an opportunity for you to negotiate, make more at your current job? Is there an opportunity for you to have more side hustle income and bring more income into the household, or potentially leaving jobs? That could be a way. A lot of times if you feel stuck or capped out income wise, it might make sense for you to actually leave. So, do you feel like you know your worth and you've done that research, and go through that process? Talk to the kids about money, find different ways to include it in the household conversations. I just think, our most financially healthy clients as adults, their parents were talking about money in the household. And even if they weren't listening to their parents, like their dad told them to save or their mom told them the value of money, even if they weren't listening, they knew it was happening in the house. And the last thing is, just don't panic. Whatever your financial situation looks like, if it doesn't feel good, if it feels stressful, and doesn't feel like where you want to be, take a deep breath. Actually have a glass of wine. Everything you do financially is fixable. Truly, we have seen. I've been helping people now for 10 years now. Wherever you are right now, your numbers, your finances. When you step on that scale, don't let it stress you out. These are just numbers. They don't define you. They're not permanent. They are changeable. They are fixable. So, having the plan, putting all these pieces together is getting financial literate. Like there's a lot of steps you can take to change that. And then, bonus exercises, doing some of those mindset shift exercises, really kind of how can you develop a healthier relationship with money, will make you make smarter money choices. And we're really big about money mantras. So, having a healthy money mantra, like, money is like power, is choice, is, healthy, whatever, and kind of putting that, writing that somewhere, kind of reminding you, helping you with that, as you're, shifting your finances, if that's something you're working on. And I think that is it for me for content to talk through. And this will be available. And I think this is the first question about crypto, Patrick. I think, yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So first question, can you discuss cryptocurrency? What experience have you seen couples separating or going through divorce? I think that's two. So crypto, if you've heard about it, a lot of people have, it's, it could be Bitcoin or Dogecoin or whatever. What do I think about it as an investment option? The way I think about it's an investment option for people. And the way I think about investing for people, my clients, is think about your investment portfolio. You're investing your money as a tree. And, there's a tree trunk, and your tree trunk should be stable, boring, ETFs, mutual funds, cash. It should be very boring and stable in that trunk. And that's going to, be the foundation for your investments. And then you have tree branches, and tree branches could be anything from cryptocurrency to individual stocks to commodities like gold and silver. Those are tree branches. And so, I'm okay. And I'm if people want to put money in the cryptocurrency market, great. But I think about it as a tree branch. And when you think about a tree branch, the tree branch should be no more than 5% of your investment portfolio. So as long as you are, as long as there's only a portion, that 5%, then you could do it as much as you want. But, we've seen clients, yes, we've literally seen clients have a crypto account that was $14,000 one day and zero the next. So it's very volatile. It's very extreme. The crypto tree branches are move around a lot and shake up a lot. So only having about 5% in there would be best. And then Yes. And then what experience have I seen couples separate or going through divorce? I kind of addressed some of that in the presentation, but the best financial advice and personal advice I tell couples is really try to get to an amicable place, because it's just better for the kids, obviously, but and for yourself personally, but definitely really better for your finances, that you can manage that together. Let's see, question 2, what is it best to consolidate debt? What services do you recommend? Yes, so we're fans of consolidating debt. I don't necessarily like debt consolidation companies, and it depends on your credit score and what the options are. Sometimes we'll look at a balance transfer card compliance. Sometimes we'll look at a personal loan. It depends on what your credit score is. Sometimes we've recommended seeing clients file for bankruptcy. And I want to tell you, bankruptcy, talk about emotions and stigmas. Can be very difficult to process, but the way we think about bankruptcy, sometimes you've gotten into like too much debt and there's just no real way out of it, and you're really not getting ahead. And I have an episode about bankruptcy on my podcast, Martinis in Your Money. So if you go to martinisinyourmoney.com and search bankruptcy, I talk more about this, but it's sometimes just a reset button, and that might be the thing you need to do to get ahead and stuff. So that could be an option. But I don't necessarily love the debt consolidation companies, because a lot of times you're stuck in a payment plan and the resolution might not be the best for you. So look at weighing up your options. If you have a good credit score, then looking at options like personal loans to consolidate would be a great thing. If your credit score is not that great and it's already not that great, you might want to consider things like bankruptcy, but that would be an individual decision for you. Let's see, where do I recommend looking for a mediator? I would just Google mediator, family planning mediators. A lot of times lawyers, if you have a lawyer already working with you, they know who they are. Sometimes your lawyer acts as a mediator. Sometimes it's a good friend, it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive, but sometimes it's really important just to have a third party, disinterested third party, especially if the two of you are having a tough time getting on the same page, and having that third party can save you a lot of money, especially if it's not the lawyer. Then, they're usually cheaper and can hopefully get you to a place where you have a settlement to go to your lawyers. What if you're being financially abused where your spouse had all of the control of the finances? Financial abuse is real, and it is challenging, and it's really important to understand your rights. And if you feel like that, then there's the National Council for Abuse, I believe. I did it. If you go to martinisinyourmoney.com, I did an episode about financial abuse and how you can manage through that. But I think the biggest thing to note is that especially if you're married, you have legal rights, and you should know what those are, and you should have a access to what's happening. So that is something to manage through. If you're still in the relationship and the spouse is controlling the finances, then you're going to have to look at what can I control myself. And sometimes, unfortunately, it means, how do I make my own income or get out of this situation. If you can't, otherwise try to deal with it legally. But I have done, there's more resources on that as well. When deciding custody, do courts weigh how much each parents have contributed to separation? Not as far as custody. Custody is usually a decision based on, between the two parents, and who, how the parents who wants to have custody. I don't think I've ever seen it's a financial contribution, unless, the child would not have the resources they needed. But usually that's decided between the child support, alimony, things like that for the child. My ex has not paid child support in over a year. My ex makes over $175,000. It's costing more to get what they owe me. Any advice? I mean, if that's the situation, I tell clients, your ex is legally responsible for child support, and the courts take it very seriously. And it might be very frustrating to maybe have to pay legal fees for that, but it can and will get to a point where their wages will be garnished, depending on the state. But for most states, they have that. So I would fight and get the lawyer get to the point where you can get to the wage garnishment, because that, and especially if your ex is making money that's like a W-2 income where they're filing it, it gets challenging when your ex makes cash, and then the government can't find them. But I have a client who took it to the courts, and with her ex, and he's had inconsistent income over the last 5 years, but she has an account where that money goes. He has wages garnished whenever he's working. She knows when he's working, because that account starts getting automatic deposits to it, because his wages are garnished wherever he works. So it's worth it, because it will go over a period of time. So this is like 5 years now. I mean, he's still not caught up, but every time it happens, like the money's going in. So that would be an exercise, an investment that you should take. What if we were never married? How can I get my ex to split the bank account and home we had together? He has all the credit, and I was simply looking to stay at the home and parent. So, it's harder when you don't have the court systems on it. But again, I would go back to that exercise of, like, if you can't get the ex to support the home, I would start thinking differently about the home. Maybe you need to look at something that you can afford on your own without that extra help. Like, I think sometimes we put too much emotional energy into the home, and our kids are going to be happy with us. Our kids are happy with us when we're happy. That is the biggest thing. And we make so many financial decisions around our kids and choices that we think is like what they want me to be happy. But at the end of the day, that's the biggest thing. So if you're not getting there, maybe you need to think differently about that financial situation. Are there less financial issues during divorce when both divorcees are about the same financially versus one being a lot better off financially? Yes. So if you both look pretty much the same on paper, it's actually, we've seen the individuals feel kind of balanced in the approach, and the courts are very balanced, and the lawyers very balanced in what gets split. So there is less. We do see very big challenges, because the person typically who's doing financially better does not want to pay the other person, and the other person who might not also needs more support and needs to work on that. And those are typically the situations that we see getting prolonged the most in the divorce settlement. And that's where I'm saying, if you're on the side of the person not doing as well financially, if you're that person not doing well financially, it's really important for you to know what budget you need, what your numbers are, and that before you get divorced, that's all resolved. Is it a good idea to let the kids, when much older, know why the divorce happened? I mean, that's a personal decision for you. My son does know. He's 14. I talked about it. It's interesting because kids are smart. I think sometimes they know. And I still love my ex. My son knows that my ex is part owner of the business still. We still get along, but we just didn't get along together, and we grew apart. And I think it's important, again, just like talking about money also, I think it doesn't hurt. It depends on your family situation, but kids when they grow up, they're going to make individual decisions, relationship decisions, and I feel like the more informed they are, the better they're off. But again, that's a personal decision. Let's see. Okay, you referenced something.com, but kind of fast. Can you please put in the chat? Oh, I don't know what that was, because that was a while ago. Whoever asked that, or somebody knows, because I've probably said a few different things.com. I'm not sure when that question came in. Trying to keep the family house, and appraisal came back much higher than expected, would result in higher payoff of the X. What are my options? That's a challenging one. Again, I would think about, again, do you want to stay in the home? If it came back higher and you can get refinanced, then you can cash out some of that, and the X can get the payoff. If you can't, sometimes what we've seen is that you can maybe negotiate, like, down the road, like the amount that that would potentially go toward the X, if that was the case. But at some point down the road, preferably, like, maybe your X would be open to that. But it might be a situation where that you might not be able to afford staying in there if you have to pay the X immediately. But you can sometimes delay the payments, and it's just kind of annotation that at some point that will happen. What happens too a lot of times is you go through the divorce process, it goes through the courts, and you have your settlement. But as long as you can make decisions, and again, you're amicable between the two of you, it doesn't have to absolutely look like that divorce settlement. So, my ex and I, we were like in the divorce settlement said selling the house in a year. I did not sell the house within a year, but he and I talked about it, and he's like, okay, well, whenever you do get to the point of selling, like we were able to discuss it, and he didn't take me back to court because I didn't sell the house. So, you don't necessarily have to, if you can get along, that's what I'm saying, the more amiable you can get, then, you can work out that kind of solution between the two of you, and it doesn't necessarily have to go through the court for it, but that would be something to try to negotiate with your ex. What advice can you give to me and my ex never married, but even though he said he would cash me out on the house we bought while together and splitting the bank account, yet now he won't follow through and continues to not help with the support for the kids either. I mean, so it's tough to get them on the homes or some kind of like, support on that, but the kids support, that is, he's genetically related to that kid. Child support's child support. So it doesn't matter if you're married or not. So I would definitely fight for the child support. If you're both on the house, again, it might be something that the selling of it would have to be, but if you're both legally on it, then you should have access to that. All right, and I think we only have 2 minutes left. I'm trying to get, there's so many of these. Let's see, what other, let me get into all the questions. My soon-to-be ex declared bankruptcy. Does that mean I should do that too? If you are tied to any of the debts, that you could be going through that process as well. I don't know if the debts are yours, but that you have debts of your own, or you're tied to those debts. If you have debts tied to with him through that process, then those, if they go through and it's goes through the process, not forgiven, but when they're written off, then you could already have debts that are going to already be written off if they're joint with him. You could file for yourself if you have your own individual debts, and that's an option for you. Okay. All right. So we got to wrap it up. I have so many questions, but if you have if you want more resources or to reach out to me or the team or have more personal questions, financialgym.com is our website. If you want to, we have free consult calls for people if you want to ask questions. We have a ton of resources for free on financialgym.com. April's Financial Literacy Month, so we have plenty more about that, and we have some podcast options there too. And I did not. The name of my podcast again is Martinis and Your Money, Living a Better Life One Cocktail at a Time. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. I salute you all, raising kids, dealing with exes, managing your personal finances, everything one step at a time. Everything you do financially is fixable. And I'm wishing you all the best.